I am really excited to facilitate today's conversation with my mentor and longtime friend Shankar and my brilliant colleagues Arpita and Ambika. Just a reminder, Q&A, while we have it on the slide as at the end, please do ask your questions along the way. We've gotten a lot of questions ahead of time, which we hope to be addressing while we're going through our slides, but we'd also like to address other questions as they come up as well. So sustainability today, adapting strategies in a shifting regulatory climate. Today, we're going to begin with the state of the market, then share our big bets into how we see sustainability going. And we're going to conclude with some predictions about where we see this really changing space going. So just to get us level set, if we can go to the next slide, want to make sure that everyone has sort of the same concept of what we mean by sustainability. Everest Group has a purpose framework where we define sustainability with people and planet at the center of our discussions. That's where we see the most impact. That's where we see the most ability to mitigate negative impacts. And on this slide, we are giving some indicative areas of sustainability services with regard to planet. So we talk about net zero, supply chain management, nature, and biodiversity. And on the people side, again, indicative, we talk about health and safety, wellness. We talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. All of this in the guise of services. So consulting services, design and build services, managed services, data management, and reporting. And in our purpose framework, wrapped around all of these concepts is a business case or a profitability or an ROI on addressing these issues, as well as making sure that there's really great monitoring and governance around these issues, because as soon as you measure it, you're able to manage it. With that, I think we can go into the next topic, or into getting into the details of really starting to talk about net zero strategies. Arpita, would you like to get us started on this conversation?
Yeah, thanks, Rita. And hello, everyone. Pleasure to be here. So first things first, let's start by addressing the elephant in the room, the impact of geopolitical environment on corporate sustainability initiatives. There's already enough doom and gloom in the market when it comes to any sustainability or ESG or climate related conversation. We're seeing a growing backlash that's driven by political headwinds, trade complexities, and even the media narratives, right? That has contributed to this perception that sustainability is somehow losing steam or already lost its steam. So we want to start today's discussion with a more realistic perspective. Okay, what does the data actually tell us about the state of corporate sustainability globally, right? What's really happening on the ground and not just in the headlines. So let's zoom out and look at the actual data, right? So on your screen, what you see is as of September 2024, roughly 60% of publicly listed companies in Forbes Global 2000 have set net zero targets. That's not wishful thinking, right? That's a major chunk of the global corporate economy making long term climate commitments. And it's not just about the pledges. The latest report just released last month from MSCI Sustainability Institute, the transition finance tracker, it shows that 14% of the listed companies globally have already verified targets under the Science Based Targets Initiative. That's a meaningful step beyond just aspiration, right? Because it's about accountability. You're bringing in an unbiased external validation. And even more promising is that in the same report, we saw that in developed markets specifically, there are real signs of decoupling between revenue growth and emissions. So in developed markets, the leading companies have successfully been able to increase their revenues while decreasing their emissions. And these emissions are mostly the direct emissions, the scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. Now, of course, it's not all smooth sailing. Scope 3 emissions, for example, the most complex ones to tackle, they still remain severely underreported. And at the same time, we are seeing some delays in targets. And in some cases, we are seeing departures of senior sustainability leaders as companies are restructuring to address the macroeconomic environment. So, yes, the sustainability journey is uneven, but let's not mistake it for regression, right? Progress is happening, and it's our job to both recognize it and accelerate it. So, that gives me the opportunity to invite Shankar. You have been on both sides of the spectrum. You have been a practitioner as well as an advisor. So, in your perspective, what's that underlying message you have for our audience in the beginning right now to who are facing these uncertain political and regulatory climate?
Yeah, thanks, Arpita. And thank you, Everest Group, for inviting me to be part of this. So I think, the trends that you talked about, Arpita, are also what I'm seeing on the ground. I think that companies will continue on this path. And it's not that there's going to be a sudden stop. And there are multiple reasons for that. I mean, companies that believe in this will continue doing it in any case because it's part of their core values, it's part of who they are. I mean, for example, the Tata Group where I was, this was very much a conviction, and we're not the only one. So I think that will continue. Companies that have made investments, especially if you look at this graph of net zero requires a lot of investments that you make upfront. Now, if those investments have been made, companies are not going to suddenly go back on them. So I think there are multiple reasons why the trend will continue. What could happen is the timing. There may be slowdowns. There may be times when the kind of speed at which the movement happens will differ depending on what's happening in the sector, on the jurisdiction where you are, the policies and the pushbacks that you're getting. But the direction of travel is, I think, quite inexorable, and I don't think that will change very much. I think investors also from the some of the conversations that one has had with investors and also suggest that it's not that push to continue will remain. And I think it's very straightforward. Investors, I remember an investor telling me that there are two emotions that guide their behavior. One is fear and one is greed. And sustainability is a fear. Their fear is if companies they are invested in do not make investments in sustainability, their own investments are at risk. So they're not doing it out of goodness of heart. They're not philanthropists. They're just hard-nosed businessmen. And they see sustainability as a real risk and therefore will push that. So I think you're right. The trend will continue. There will be slowdown. Companies will not necessarily talk about it as much as they used to because they're still trying to gauge what's going on in policy in media and so on. So they will do it perhaps more quietly than before, but they will continue to do it. Is my sense. Back
Absolutely.
to you.
And I think, Vida, this is the right time for us to take a pulse from our audience as well.
Yes, perfect lead into our poll. So everyone get ready to participate. We have a question here of how have recent political and regulatory developments influenced your organization's sustainability investments? If you are a service provider, you might want to answer this on behalf of your clients and the enterprises that you're working with. But we have four options here. Accelerate your investments, giving a pause on your investments. There's actually no major impact on the political and regulatory developments. And then the last question or last option is still assessing. And Arpita, in my sense, I sort of look at answer three as being a really, or option three as being a really interesting one, where either they don't want to be public about what they're doing or about the pauses or whatever, or they're really just dead serious. I think maybe that separating the wheat from the chaff, I don't know. What's your sense?
No, absolutely. Even I am inclined towards no major impact. I'm hoping we get something on accelerated investments as well, because ultimately uh, that's our reality, right? That's the world we are living in. If you do not address them now, we don't know how the businesses will go. I am disappointed to see no accelerated investments, but at least we were right about no major impact, and that's definitely a very positive sign for us to see, right? And if we go to the next slide, that's completely aligned with our conversations as well. We're talking to leaders, leading practitioners, as well as the service providers globally. One thing that's completely clear is that companies are not stalling their sustainability efforts, as Shankar also mentioned. Instead, they are taking a more value driven lens, the business lens. So rather than doing 300 things for PR, you focus on top five material sustainability aspects that are relevant for your organization, and you can support that with an interlinked business outcome of cost efficiency or maybe business continuity. So these leaders understand that today's political or regulatory noise, although is real, but it's also temporary, right? They see the science and facts are ultimately shaping the playing field, and that's going to determine what businesses are going to thrive in the long run. So, yes, the language around ESG may be cooling, especially in some specific markets, but the convictions, the underlying convictions, I'm completely aligned with Shankar and our audience here. They haven't changed, right? Behind the scenes, companies are still investing, still innovating, still preparing for a future where sustainability is a core part of their business strategy. And that's not just for environmental metrics. I know we talk a lot about net zero, but social impact metrics, governance metrics are equally becoming important for organizations as investors and customers hold them more and more accountable. With that, let's look at the impact of this macroeconomic environment across sectors. So, if we move to the next slide, we have tried to identify across different industries what are the major industries that are going to suffer at least temporarily in terms of sustainability investments versus some other industries. So, energy and utilities, manufacturing, electronics, these are the industries that we expect to face high tariff impact. So, we might see some pauses related to sustainability in these particular industries as the trade war accelerates. However, at the same time, industries such as BFSI and public sector, we see these industries to be more immune to that macroeconomic sentiment, considering specifically BFSI, because there is increased demand for transparent climate data, supply chain risk from investors. And with that, if we move to the last slide for this section, to see how the sustainability sentiment is evolving, right? In 2022, rather at the peak of ESG trending, there was mass adoption of sustainability initiatives in companies. However, most of these initiatives were limited to regulatory compliance and public relation optics rather than any material impact, right? And the ecosystem of solution providers, service providers was also immature. They were still fine tuning their offerings, they were still trying to figure out and building POCs that were more fragmented, but struggling to integrate or even get on board the enterprises to adopt these initiatives at scale. Fast forward to where we are right now, we see a more dramatic shift, right? Enterprises are now more focused on consistent and scalability of sustainability solutions that are more linked to the ROI of these investments, right? Even service providers have matured. They're moving from fragmented solutions to more end-to-end integrated domain-specific offerings. These firms are building full-scale implementation capabilities to help their clients on their sustainability journeys. And looking ahead to 2028, we expect sustainability to be embedded into business strategies, right? Integrating sustainable reporting with the financial reporting so that companies start accounting for the externalities into their long term growth and vision. And Shankar, I think I'll bring you again here. What do you think? So this is where we are right now. How do you think this journey has been as an on-ground practitioner, as an advisor, and how do you think the journey ahead looks like for organizations?
Yeah, thanks, Arpita. I think this slide is really very good because it very well encompasses what I'm seeing also on the ground. So kudos to you to put all this together. Just a bit of flavor to some of the things, especially when we're talking about moving from the PR bit to the ROI driven and it being embedded. I think this is an important transition and a good transition because I think what was happening otherwise was there was a lot of distraction with what was happening in the ESG space. There's too much of noise and very little substantive stuff, very little serious stuff because it is being driven by, as you said, PR and compliance. And it will move to the more serious. So in a sense, all those disruptions that are talked about is good for sustainability because the serious ones and the serious issues will what will get focused. And I see a couple of very interesting things that are happening. So one is in the governance side what is happening at boards and what's happening at senior management in terms of attention to sustainability issues. More board conversations, more board committees being formed which focus on sustainability. So that is happening. Uh, the KPIs relating to sustainability are now also moving into KRAs of individuals and departments. So it's becoming part of performance. It's becoming part of rewards. So there is also a continuous incentivization of saying this is serious, and not only it's not just the role of the sustainability department. Sustainability is everyone's business. It's procurement's business. It's R&D's business. It's the finance team's business, and so on and so forth. So I think it's getting to be more widespread, and which is, in a sense, what you're saying is getting more embedded. Uh, and I think what I'm also beginning to see is some signs of how sustainability is getting used in business decisions. So, for example, I know of a company that uses its uh, its greenhouse gas intensity targets as a basis to decide whether it wants to acquire another company or not. And if it feels that acquisition will make it go off the target, then it chooses not to acquire that company. So, actually using this in core business, like uh, you're setting up a plant, a new greenfield site. In the old days, you would only look at, is this good for me from logistics, from, availability of water and so on and so forth. Now it's about biodiversity impacts. It's about human impacts. So I think these are becoming part of very core business processes. And I think that is the interesting and the right thing, because if you want to save uh, humanity and you want to save the planet, you got to be doing the serious stuff. And I think that's where it's headed, and that's, I think, a very good sign. Back to you, Arun.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for sharing some of those examples as well. We will get into a more number of examples and practical applications of technology is driving sustainability. But I think that was very relevant example. And yes, we are seeing it more and more as we talk to our clients in the domain. And that I think brings us to our next question for our enterprise audience as well as provider audience, right, Rita? Who exactly is driving these initiatives into your organizations? Do you want to take us to our next poll?
Great, yes. So, and I think both Shankar and Arpita put this perfectly, that it's no longer just the CSO's role, but we do want to know, in your view, how do you describe the role of the Chief Sustainability Officer in your organization or those of your clients? An extension of marketing, which we think is the past, primarily focused on compliance and reporting, shaping enterprise-wide sustainability strategy, collaborating closely with IT, finance, and operations teams, is it still evolving? The role is not clearly defined. And then last but definitely the least, in our opinions, we don't have a dedicated CSO yet. So definitely, we'd love to hear your opinions on this. And as we're thinking about this, Shankar, as our audience is thinking about it, tell us, I mean, you were the very first CSO at the Tata Group. What would you have said back then? And maybe what do you see as the trend today in these options? Nope, you're
So the
on mute.
past,
Nope, there you go.
so the past was certainly, the first two, extension of marketing. Well, I, that's really when there wasn't a role of the CSO. It used to be done by the COPCOM or, one of those functions. And so it automatically became that. And it's only after that you started thinking about it as a separate function. And I think compliance and reporting naturally came first. Uh, and reporting, mind you, was an interesting sort of trigger or a push because although mandatory reporting was very limited, but you were getting a lot more stakeholders like investors, customers asking for reports. So then reporting therefore started to become more onerous, so to speak, and therefore the need for the sales. But I think it's evolved in the last 5 years dramatically. And I think a CSO has seen, I mean, while the core of reporting might still be part of the CSO's role, the CSO is more of uh, is moving from just being a doer to a facilitator to a almost a coach with all the other departments having to play the role, because ultimately, as the to use your American expression, the tire hits the road in those departments, in procurement, in human resources, in CSR. So how do we get them to do that? How do we get them to embed it into their business? And that's what the CSO's role is now. It's to help them do that, help them make sure that things happen. It is working with them to understand what are the stakeholders saying, what do I need to take more seriously. So it's almost like the conductor of an orchestra, if you like, trying to do this, trying to listen to different people, making it all work. Uh, I mean, the you have 67% saying shaping enterprise-wide strategy. Yes, that is part of it, but you can't do that without everything else, without being trusted by all the various parts of the company. And I think that's where the role is moving to right now. And it's very, very exciting to be a CSO in a company right
I agree with that. And I think it is also interesting to see, 13% saying it's still evolving and even another 13 saying that they don't have one. So, 26% of our audience is sort of still grappling with that role. And only 7% are doing that collaboration or that mentorship that you described, Shankar. So I think we have a really interesting audience here, and we have hopefully a lot to share in terms of where we see things going.
Can I
So
just sort of a quick point there, just to we got to also remember that companies are also in a continuum on the journey. Some people are in the early stage, some people are matured. So I think it is only natural that you will have people at different will answer different parts of it, and I think it just reflects where they are in the journey, nothing more.
perfect. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I think Shankar, exactly what you said leads us into our next slide, which is based on the work that we've been doing across businesses. The CSO role has shifted from the compliance custodian to really that transformation office. So we are seeing the majority of our deals and the stakeholders that our enterprises are talking to are the CSOs. Now, because we're looking at services and technology, in our case, it's often the CIOs and the CTOs that are we're talking to as well. And chief procurement officers, I think Shankar also mentioned chief procurement officers as a really important stakeholder because, especially when we start talking scope three, but also in managing the overall carbon footprints, et cetera. And then it's getting what I find interesting about this is seeing the CEO as the second to the last percentage, because I think initially when we started doing these polls and looking at these stakeholders, it was almost always if you don't have your CEO bought in, it's not going to happen. And now we're starting to see that this is an exciting, as Shankar said, an exciting time that we're able to say, no, all these other CXO roles are coming in and driving the agendas. So with that, I am finally going to be able to happily bring in my colleague Ambika to double click on this information.
Sure. So if you could just move to the next slide. Now that we've talked about the key stakeholders that are driving these engagements, I think we can move on to which are the industries where we see a lot of this adoption happening, right? What we're seeing across industries is steady progress in adoption, although it's not very uniform, right? The complexity of use cases could vary considerably based on industry maturity, as Shankar talked about, various enterprises being on the continuum of maturity, the regulatory exposure that they have, and the ease of measuring the ROI that they can get out of their sustainability investments. For example, an energy and utilities company, investment in things like grid modernization or energy storage optimization can deliver direct measurable benefits like, let's say, reduced transmission losses or in some cases even regulatory incentives. So the ROI is tangible and in many cases immediate. So that drives adoption as well. If you look at the industries individually, energy and utilities as a sector leads in terms of adoption, but it's also important to acknowledge the nuance here, right? So while long-term ambition remains strong, near-term momentum is being shaped by the macroeconomic factors that Arpita previously touched upon, right? There's rising demand for electricity, but there's also political uncertainty in some markets like the US. And there's the cost of energy transition that is at play as well, right? That being said, utilities are still moving forward, particularly in areas like grid modernization, corporate PPAs, and storage investments. They're also diversifying, right? Just into renewables, but also natural gas with carbon capture and nuclear energy as well. In manufacturing, digital twins have emerged as a particularly important theme. So they're using digital twins for operational efficiency, real-time emissions modeling, and of course, predictive maintenance for assets, right? I recently saw this case study where a manufacturer was using a digital replica of its production line to simulate how different materials or process tweaks would affect the carbon output. So, eventually allowing the
Okay.
teams to optimize before making any physical changes, right? So full scale deployment is still evolving, but we're seeing growing investment in digital twins when it comes to manufacturing. If I talk about BFSI, the focus is shifting to sustainable finance, ESG data integration, and climate risk modeling. Right, the sector is playing an interesting dual role in decarbonizing its own operations while also influencing sustainability outcomes across its lending and investment portfolios. Right, so and with how things have been in the last 4 or 5 years, climate and supply chain risk have become integral to how investors work. So that's definitely pushing a lot of adoption in this sector. Then retail and CPG is again a very interesting sector where we feel there'll be pretty high growth in the coming year or so because it's heavily consumer facing and the push is around circular packaging, ethical sourcing, and carbon labeling as well. So for them, sustainability directly ties into brand differentiation and consumer loyalty, right? So overall, sustainability isn't a one size fits all kind of a thing, right? Each industry is progressing based on its unique mix of regulatory exposure, customer expectations, and operational complexity, right? So far, we've talked about how enterprises are approaching sustainability, but if we move to the next slide, uh, you know, we can slowly now shift gears from why enterprises are investing to where they're actually placing those bets, right? We'll look at the use cases gaining the most traction, those that are not only aligned with compliance and stakeholder expectations, but also helping them deliver tangible ROI, as we discussed. But before we dive deeper into specific use cases, there's a quick poll for you, right? And if we could just run the poll, yeah. So, which of the following sustainability use cases is your organization currently investing in or prioritizing? Is it net zero strategy, responsible supply chain? Honestly, this is where my bet is that most of the votes will come in. There's sustainable IT, ESG data management again is a key theme that I'm very interested in, seeing how much votes it gets, because it's the foundation of all the other use cases. Then there's people-led initiatives, and of course we have options for enterprises who are still exploring or have put hold on the investments that they're making. But as people are voting, Shankar, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. How did you look at these investments back when you were a CSO, and how do you think that is changing now?
Yeah, thanks, Ambika. So, first of all, my job was a very complicated one because in the Tata Group, we had more than 100 companies, uh, 30 listed companies in just about every sector. In fact, we used to be often referred to as a salt to software conglomerate because we used to produce salt and we used to produce software. So, and what you would, as you would expect, it is very sector specific. What are the kinds of issues that you have? So, for example, if you look at Tata Motors, which was the automotive company, a lot of the work started to happen in responsible supply chain and circularity, as well as a lot of work in product development, which was in a sense related to climate risk, because manufacturing the automobile is not carbon intensive. But the automobile, when it is used, is extremely carbon intensive, right? Because you're using fuel and you're emitting all kinds of GHG. So each sort of sector had its own peculiarities, and that's why the whole concept of materiality is a very, very important one. And one of the things that we were struggling as a group is to come up, and I used to get pressure from the from senior people at the chairman's office saying, can we have a set of material issues for the group? And I would say it is impossible because you have steel, which will have a different set of issues, and net zero starts becoming very important there, and automobile, where net zero is not that important, but human rights issues and supply chain is important. So I think there is an element of sector specificity, but having said that, there are common themes. So people-led initiatives that you have is something that is common because you can't be in any business without that. Some businesses you have more. The software business, you had more people than you had in some other businesses. So there would be those variations, but there would be a focus on some across the board, like people-led initiatives, like uh, 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 waste and waste management and so on. So it was a bit varied as you would expect, and I think that's really the reality of and that is how it should be, right? Because each business has its own peculiarities, and the way it impacts the planet and people is very different.
Absolutely. It's very specific to the business context as well. And we have the poll results in, and not very surprising to see a lot of votes, 62% for net zero strategy and 85% for responsible supply chain as well. Responsible supply chain is a tricky business, right? Given there's a lot of data involved, and it's very difficult to arrange for that data and get your suppliers on board to give out that data to you in a credible manner as well. But moving on to the next slide. Yeah. So we have, let's just dive deep into all of these use cases and see which of these is currently growing at the highest rate as well, and how we project it to grow further. So if we talk about the environmental side of things, these usually dominate. So net zero services and responsible supply chain, something that came out in the poll as well, is seeing the highest current adoption. and we have the highest projected growth as well, because this is where a lot of focus goes, not just in terms of regulatory focus but also stakeholder expectations. But one very interesting aspect, or one very interesting use case, is the ESG data management space, right? Because uh, as I said, this is the base of all the other use cases that are out there. You can only manage something that you're measuring. And I think Shankar, right before this webinar, as we were talking, he enlightened me with the other half of this saying, which said that he will only measure what's convenient. So that's the tricky part here again, right? These days, there are a lot of tools, and we recently published this report on ESG data management platforms, which looks at the leading providers in the space, what their capabilities are. And what we understood is that it's a very broad, it's a very expansive space with various categories of providers at play. So there are some niche platform providers which specifically look at ESG data and provide enterprises with the depth that is needed in some of the industries, whereas there are broad-based ESG data management platforms which bring in the scale that a lot of the larger enterprises might need, right? They integrate with existing ERPs and finance and procurement systems better. So they have their unique value proposition as well. So both the categories are equally important in shaping how the market is going. But it depends on the context and the actual needs of the enterprise or the buyer itself. Then, of course, there are people-led offerings, right, that are, again, currently not seeing the same level of adoption that maybe net zero services are. But we see that it's becoming increasingly vital, because enterprises are starting to understand that you cannot isolate people-led offerings from environmental aspect of ESG. They do go hand in hand, right? And with that, we can move to the next slide. Yeah. So far we've talked about our big bets, what they look like, what the projected growth is. But there are certain trends that are shaping the market as well, which is what we have on the next slide. Yeah. So these are the fry trends, and I'll quickly walk you through all of them, right? The first one is around emerging technologies and how that will unlock opportunities. There's a lot happening in terms of AI, Gen AI, agentic AI. We talked about digital twins in the manufacturing sector as well, which is unlocking new possibilities for real-time decision making and predictive analytics, right? Then there's sustainable IT, which will move to the center of decarbonization efforts as enterprises realize carbon intensity of their digital infrastructure is a key element that they do need to address when they're talking about their broader emissions. And this is one lever that will help them reduce their emissions a lot. The third trend is circularity, which will scale beyond pilots, becoming embedded in sourcing, design, and supply chain models, driven by both regulation and consumer pressure, right? The fourth one is the capital markets, right, which will continue to drive innovation in climate tech as sustainability becomes material to investors and financial risk assessments. And finally, we expect sustainability as a service to gain serious traction, right? Offering modular, tech integrated, and outcome focused sustainability delivery models that reduce internal pressures. And with that, I'd love to bring you in, Shankar. What are your thoughts on these trends? Where do you see the biggest opportunities or even risks for that matter as we head into this next phase of maturity?
Yeah, thank you, Abhika. I think these trends are very, very interesting, and I think they will play out differently with different sectors as we spoke about. I think circularity is already something that is getting mainstream, and it's getting driven by different considerations. I think one important consideration you talked about customers and so on, but important consideration is also the fact that uh, that resources are you're facing a resource shortage, uh, and there's a very interesting uh, graphic of the periodic table which actually says that some of the elements in the periodic table, we've all done periodic table in chemistry in school, some of those elements will not even exist at 50 to 100 years from now because they're just going to be overused. So obviously circularity is if you're going to be using that material in your it's in your process, then you got to do something about it. Your first response is circularity. Circularity is certainly a very interesting one. I think somewhere embedded in all of this, and you spoke about this, Ambika, is the S dimension. I think the S dimension is something that is going to start, is already getting very, very important. And I think what is happening is that in the past, whether it was workers, whether it was communities, were not were not being were not empowered enough to speak up, and I think that has changed quite dramatically. And so, the kind of human rights violations that would happen both within the four walls of a plant or in the supply chain is no longer a possibility. So I think those will be some of the other trends that will sort of come in. And it will, as I said, that's cross-cutting. It will sort of be across all of these five areas that you spoke about. One other thing, I'm a mechanical engineer. So for me, technology is not information technology. Technology is really hard stuff. How do you a blast furnace, a turbine? Rita will associate with that. Uh, and I think it's those technologies that are also going to becoming very, very important. So, chemicals, using a chemical process as opposed to using a biological process. So, I think there's going to be a lot of thinking and innovation around how do you produce the same chemical using biological processes and biomimicry. So, a lot of work and thinking will start having to happen over there. And what companies will be doing, it will be making bets on that and actually be making investments in companies that are doing research or startups in those areas, because those are the technologies then that they will have to absorb and use for them to continue to be relevant. Otherwise, they will be, I mean, for example, just imagine a company that was producing power using coal. If solar wasn't around, what would they do? They would just have to shut shop. Now all of them are transitioning because there is a technology that is available. I think that's going to be the story of many, many industries going forward. And that kind of technology is also going to be something that is important, and they're going to look to service providers to also be talking about those kinds of technologies, not just information.
Absolutely. And we'll be diving deeper into each of these trends. But before that, Rita, do you want to take up the next slide?
I do, I do. Yes. Before we double click on all five of those aspects, because you joined us today, I want to make sure that we make an offer to you and thank you for coming to this webinar and participating in this conversation. So we have a complimentary call with our sustainability analysts to gain deeper insights into this market. If you're interested, there'll be a link in the chat that you can click on for a complimentary 30-minute session. As well as any of us, you can reach out to any of us with these email addresses. We're just excited about keeping this conversation going and yes, going forward with this, right? So I want to hand this over to Arpita to take us into the very first aspect of the double click or the trends that we're seeing into emerging tech.
Absolutely. So starting with the first theme, and I think Shankar has put a lot of color to this already, so I will not spend a lot of time on this particular theme. Yes, what once seemed like abstract concepts like carbon reduction, carbon removal, transition to renewable energy, not just having renewable energy in the mix, you have majority of your electricity sourced through renewable energy, circular design of products, as Shankar was mentioning, locally sourcing products, recycling, refurbishing things. all of these is being enabled by technologies, and not just digital technologies in the true sense. I'm an electrical engineer, Shankar, so I, I am aligned with you that technology in its true sense. But for the sake of this conversation, if I bring our attention to digital technologies also, such as AI, IoT, advanced analytics, they're playing a very critical role in sustainability enablement per se, right? To bring in the true sense technology also into the picture. If we look at L'Oreal, for example, they're using technology, AI, to change the way they create products. They're already thinking about, okay, 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, what our products should look like. They want to source 90% of their raw materials more sustainably. That's more easy to that the cradle to grave cycle is does not have a bad impact on the environment. Hence, similarly, other technologies, they are coming together to make it easier for businesses to embed sustainability into their daily operations and drive long term impact. And I think, talking about technology and information technology, this brings us naturally to the next slide, which is more about making technology itself more sustainable, right? Today's IT leaders, they are not only driving innovation, they're also grappling with rising energy demands and infrastructure costs, especially with the rapid growth of AI and cloud adoption, right? As a result, there's a growing need to redesign your enterprise IT, keeping sustainability in mind, focusing on efficiency, resilience, and reduced environmental impact. So, in fact, over the past 12 months, more than 15% of global IT services RFPs that we have seen, they have included sustainability KPIs as a non-functional requirement. So, in this context, organizations such as Green Software Foundations that are doing meaningful work to help companies measure and reduce the carbon footprint of their applications. Their work is also driving awareness and accountability in the software development and IT operations. And at the same time, there has been a notable rise in FinOps practices, a discipline that brings together the finance team, the operations team, and the engineering teams to optimize the cloud spending, right? Beyond cost, efficiency, FinOps, it's also enabling organizations to align their sustainability goals and help extract more value from their cloud investments. And Shankar, you were talking about some very interesting data points that are related to the environmental impact of IT itself. It would be good if you can share some of those with our audience.
Yeah, sure, Pita. Thank you. So, in fact, just a couple of weeks ago, I was with Wipro, which is one of India's largest IT services, global IT services provider, and they were just talking about some of the impacts that IT potentially can have on ESG. And I just pull out a few numbers just to give you the sense that why business as usual, even in this space, is not an option. So if you continue the business as usual sort of way, apparently the power consumption due to data centers will increase by almost 200% by 2035. So that it will treble in the next 10 years. There'll be an increase of 33% on e-waste due to the use of technology and the demand for technologies. That's just on the E side. On the S side, 9 million global jobs might be displaced by 2030 due to use of AI and Gen AI. 160 million women will need to change jobs due to AI and automation by 2030. And on the governance side, 20 trillion will be the global cost of cybercrime by 2030. And just last year in 2024, there were 1.7 billion data breaches across the world. So, the way we just can't continue to do IT the way it's been doing. And I know there's a lot of work being done, but I just wanted to highlight this to say that, to your point, Arpita, that a lot of sustainability needs to be baked into into IT services itself. Otherwise, this is the kind of impacts that we might see, which none of us want. So I just thought I should share this with you. Thank you.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you talked about cyber, right? If you look at very large organizations, very important organizations in the BFSI industry specifically, the more and more they are opening their touch points for maybe make it easier for customers, make the lives easier of customers, but they at the same time, how much they are risking that personal data, that important private information at the hands of security breaches, etc. With that, I think we will move on to the next theme, Ambika.
Yeah. Thanks, Arpita. So the third big shift we're seeing is the mainstreaming of circularity, and not just as a sustainability imperative, but as a blueprint for future-ready business models, right? We're seeing this play out in several ways. So from product design and packaging to supply chain logistics and material reuse, right? In sectors like manufacturing, retail, electronics, organizations are embedding circular principles directly into core business processes. Shankar, you worked closely with enterprises on this. How are you seeing circularity play out on the ground?
Absolutely vital. And this is one thing which is agnostic to the sector that you're in, because it is important whichever sector you're in. And for example, in the Tata Group, we had actually got all our product designers into a room and asked them to dismantle a printer and separate out its parts. And we gave them 2 hours to do it. None of them could, because it is not designed to be dismantled. And if it's not designed to be dismantled, how are you going to achieve a circular economy? Uh, and on the other hand, you have the case of Jaguar Land Rover, which is designed for circularity, that if you have the right tools and equipment, in 3 hours, you can dismantle a Jaguar car. All the plastics are color coded, you can separate out everything and you can have it. So in circularity is not just a it's not the old wine of waste management in the new bottle called circularity. It's about even starting with the design of circularity. And the other thing that's interestingly happening in the circularity space is product as a service. You had earlier talked about software as a service, but also products as a service. So Philips uh, doesn't sell bulbs; it sells lumens. Now, what that enables Philips to do is that it doesn't have to convince a buyer that an LED bulb is what they need. Uh, that is their call. They will use whatever is the most efficient way to provide the lumens that a client. It can use the best technology. It can do a lot of work in extending product life beyond, by repairing, by extending life. So, a lot of options exist. So, designing for circularity, extending product life, these are all parts of that whole puzzle that we call circularity. And it's something that I can't imagine any company that is producing a thing that cannot be taking circularity very serious.
Thanks, Shankar. I absolutely love the examples that you used to explain your point. Moving on to the next slide, we'll see that if circularity is reshaping how businesses create and retain value, then climate finance is something that is reshaping how that value gets funded and scaled. Right. So this is what a fourth trend looks like. Right. How capital markets are accelerating sustainability agenda, right? In 2024, 14% of global bond issuance was tied to green and sustainability linked instruments. We're also seeing new financial vehicles emerge like orange bonds and sustainability linked loans that combine environmental targets with social outcomes. And with that, we can move to the final trend. We're very closely watching the emergence of sustainability as a service, right? There's a delivery model that offers enterprises the ability to scale impact without the burden of building everything in house. So, at its core, this model recognizes that many enterprises would lack the internal resources, the talent, the technology needed to drive sustainability at scale. So, they're looking not just for tools, but for partners who can sort of co own the journey with them, right? So these providers, what they do is one of the most valuable components of this model is the advisory led engagement. This is where providers act not just as solution implementers, but as strategic guides, helping enterprises navigate all the ambiguity, design net zero roadmaps, and manage change across functions. The other key lever in sustainability as a service is ecosystem powered approach. So we're seeing the rise of integrated ecosystem where providers are partnering with hyperscalers, ESG platforms, academic institutions, and even climate tech startups for that matter. Ultimately, sustainability as a service gives enterprises a way to access expertise, execution, and enablement in a very modular and flexible way. And with that, I think we can move on to the next slide. We're done with the trends. And Arpita, I'm going to hand over to you for the takeaways.
Thanks, Ambika. So, if you are an enterprise practitioner, if you are on the at the helm of implementing sustainability initiatives, strategizing for your organization, these are the top key takeaways that we have for you. Treat technology as a force multiplier. We cannot emphasize on this particular aspect enough, right? Because you do not need to create solutions from scratch. There's an fast evolving ecosystem of technology providers, software providers, hardware technology providers, OEMs that are day by day building innovative solutions and advancements that can help you accelerate those initiatives internally. And you need to think of these service providers as transformation partners and not vendors. Sustainability as a whole is a horizontal for an organization, right? You cannot approach sustainability in a fragmented manner. You cannot have one POCs and pause and then three other POCs in three different segments with three different stakeholders leading those engagements, right? It's more about having a more centralized approach towards sustainability involving, and it's not just one person's game, as Shankar mentioned before. It's not just CSO's job. You will have to involve your CFOs, you will have to involve your CIOs. And that's where the role of service providers can become increasingly important because they bring in the talent, they are able to bring in the right domain expertise, they have the experience with other clients, so they can help you navigate that journey better. And prioritize partner with full stack capabilities. As Ambika was just mentioning about sustainability as a service. So as and when you bring in a provider, you need to look at what kind of capabilities does that provider bring to the table. Is it more about advisory? Is it more about implementation? Is it limited to one particular aspect of my organization? And hence that those full stack capabilities will help you navigate your journey better. Redesign your engagement models to focus more on outcomes, talking about the ROI aspect of sustainability, considering the paucity of time. We will be sharing these slides with all of you for your, you can refer to them later as well, but I'll quickly turn to the final slide of our conversation, which is key takeaways for the service providers, which is around focus your attention to more outcomes rather than capabilities. Help your client understand what is the business value or long term business KPI that the sustainability initiative has the potential to impact, right? And targeting the right stakeholder mix, who are going to be the sponsors for your engagement. As we saw in the earlier slides, you were talking about CSOs are majorly running the sustainability journeys, and that they're increasingly playing a very critical role in driving these sustainability journeys. At the same time, CIOs, CTOs, considering the role digital technologies are playing in enabling sustainability. So, identifying the right stakeholders will help you get those conversations moving. And at the same time, there's a lot of knowledge gap within the industry, right? Even enterprises, they have the targets, but they might not know how to reach there. So hence that expertise of creating that roadmap, identifying the right milestones becomes more important. And then, as I talked about, having those full stack offerings, having those full stack capabilities to combine advisory, technology, domain expertise, and the talent, the right talent that can enable sustainability journeys for your clients. And at the same time, continue to innovate, experiment, not be fiddled by the macroeconomic disruptions, identifying those streamlined swim lanes. Okay, these are the three things that we are going to build more expertise and more capabilities, and continuing to support those clients on those two or three particular areas such as net zero strategy, ESG data management, sustainable IT, would definitely take the conversations forward. With that, I think we are at the end of our conversation. Any final remarks, Shankar, from you?
No, nothing. I shouldn't take away time from the participants. So we should just leave some time for them if they have a few questions. But thank you, Arpita, for asking.
We did actually receive a lot of questions ahead of time, and we just got another question, but we realized we're over time. We will get back to you over email and share our thoughts, and really appreciate all of the discussion and conversation. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you, everyone.